Things are always changing and evolving. And Danielle and I, thyroid coach Danielle, my friend Danielle Métive, who I've interviewed here and in our summit, we talk about it a lot because she comes from a science point of view. She's a scientist, and she says that science is always changing and evolving. And so is nutrition, and so is supplementation, and so is lifestyle. Like, I mean, there's everything is always changing and evolving. Nothing remains stagnant. And today's conversation reminded me of that because certain things that we may have thought of in the past or even before we went into perimenopause and menopause now looks different for us because our bodies are changing, our minds are changing, everything is changing, right? So we need to adapt, which is the word, the operative word is adapt. We need to adapt as we go into this new phase of life. So today's conversation, we really go into things that have changed and evolved for us from before we were in menopause to once we're in perimenopause and menopause. And even for those who were in perimenopause and menopause, maybe, several years ago, things are changing and adapting now. So I'm excited to introduce you to today's guest. But before I do, I'm going to do a quick introduction to who I am. My name is Andrea Donsky. I'm a nutritionist for 20 years. I'm a menopause educator and a published menopause researcher. I'm also the co-founder of wearemorphus.com, a company that empowers you to take control of your health and symptoms with nutrition, lifestyle, supplements, and research. And talking about research, I hope you take a moment, if you haven't done so already, to fill out our 11 surveys, which we currently have on our website, with our newest one being our Healthcare Insights, because we are going to continue to publish research and we need your help. Right now, which is really exciting, our signs and symptoms surveys has over 5,000 responses. So if you haven't filled it out yet, go fill that one out. Fill out all the other ones. They literally, each one will take you under a minute to do. But yet you are helping to move menopause and perimenopause research forward. So I'm super grateful for those who already filled it out. And if you haven't, please go do so. You can find them at www.wearemorphus.com, and it's in the research tab at the top. So you can click on that and it'll take you to the 11 different surveys. Today I'm speaking with Cynthia Thurlow. She's a nurse practitioner, host of the Everyday Wellness podcast, author, and international speaker with over 15 million views for her second TEDx talk, Intermittent Fasting Transformational Technique. Wow, that is incredible. With over 25 years of experience in health and wellness, Cynthia is a globally recognized expert in perimenopause and menopause and intermittent fasting, and has been featured on ABC, Fox 5, KTLA, CW, Medium, Entrepreneur, and The Megyn Kelly Show. Her mission is to help empower women to live their most optimal lives in perimenopause and beyond. And I was recently on her podcast, Everyday Wellness, and I'm so excited to welcome her to mine. Now, here's Cynthia. Welcome to Menopause Reimagined, Cynthia.
Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Same. So I interviewed you back for the Menopause Shift Summit. This was in 2021, I believe. And at the time, we had talked about intermittent fasting. So I was excited to have you come on my podcast. Although I'm like, it's like everything happens for a reason. I'm like, you reached out to me on Instagram, which I was so grateful that you did. And I was just telling you before we went live that I think you're amazing. I think the way you collaborate, the way you support other women. I just want to give you the big shout out because when I see a woman, and my community knows this, we talk a lot about supporting women. When we see a woman who's supporting other women, I'm like, kudos. And that's why I'm like so happy that you're on my podcast.
No, thank you. I think it is hard enough being a woman at this stage of life that I think collaboration is key. I am oftentimes humbled by how gracious guests are and people I interact with. And I try to make sure that I'm always equally gracious, equally collaborative, because the only way we can really amplify our messages is by supporting one another. And I think that I don't look at it as competition. I look at it as each one of us have unique gifts and benefits that we can offer to our communities. And my feeling is we're all secure in who we are. And that's the reason why amplification is so easy.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we're on the same page. So I'm so happy to have you. All right. So I know that you're an expert on many things. And what we're going to cover today, we're going to talk about intermittent fasting and we're going to talk about digestive health. And the reason let's start with intermittent fasting, because when we spoke back in 2021, you've done so much research. You've written a couple of books. I see behind you, the Intermittent Fasting Transformation. I know you've done a TED Talk. So I thought it would be a really great place to start. And take our audience through, what is intermittent fasting, and then what has changed for you over the years, like based on, what we talked about in 2021 versus now being, several years later. How has it evolved for you?
It's hard to believe that conversation was in 2021. It feels like a lifetime ago. But when I think about intermittent fasting as being one of many strategies that women can embrace as they're navigating perimenopause and menopause and beyond, it's helping them understand that there is value in eating less frequently. Now, that could look different for each one of us. And I think that, probably back in 2021, I was still more like rigid, flexible, but a little more rigid in my thought process around it. But I do think that if we are eating in a caloric deficit chronically, that in and of itself can be problematic. So it's not to suggest that it's not still a strategy that I embrace, that I teach. I have programs, I talk about it a lot. But I think that I have become much more flexible around the concept of eating meals and frequency of with which we eat. I think for so many individuals, I've come to find that sustainability really has to be the key. And so sustainability for many of my patients now is just 12 hours of digestive rest. There
Mm-hmm.
are still benefits from not eating for 12 hours out of the day. And I think that the message for women should never be, we want to aim for being skinny. What we want to be is we want to be healthy, we want to be strong. I know Mary Claire talks a lot about, I'm ensuring I don't end up with an old lady body, but she doesn't mean it from a perspective of, gaining weight. She means it from a perspective of maintaining muscle mass, maintaining bone mass, not succumbing to frailty, not putting yourself at risk for falls, remaining flexible, remaining strong. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would echo the same thing, that my definition of fasting has remained, fairly consistent, but I now am embracing the concept of digestive rest, which is something that everyone can do. Whereas I think fasting really has to be utilized. It's like a tool, like any other tool, in the right way at the right time. It's a hormetic stressor. Digestive rest is really speaking to being a little more gentle, looking at things from a more of a nurturing perspective. So when I talk about digestive rest, it's like, can you get enough protein into that 12-hour period of time? More often than not, the answer is yes. If you have a compressed feeding window, it may be more challenging. I know that I've met certainly a lot of men who get angry because they're like, I can eat 120, 150 grams of protein in one meal. I'm like, good for you. I don't know any women that are capable of doing that, at least not women at my stage of life. So I think from many, many perspectives, it's this evolution, which I will be the first person to say, I don't practice as a nurse practitioner the way I did 10 years ago, the way I did 5 years ago. We are meant to evolve. Our messaging is meant to evolve. And so I very humbly say that, if you've been intermittent fasting for a while, there may be a time and a place for making some changes, making some edits, making some accommodations. I know personally, I'm working diligently on building muscle. And because I'm working on building muscle, that means I have to have 3 good distributions of protein over the course of my day.
Mm-hmm. And I love the idea of evolution because the truth is, even science is constantly evolving. So it's okay. And I love the fact that you are like, yeah, I'm changing as times are changing as well. And we're also different too. So what works for me may not work for you, and vice versa. Right. And even myself, I'm a big fan of intermittent fasting, and I've done it for many, many years. And now I find, just because of certain things that are going on in my life or certain ways that I'm feeling, I'm like, I'm changing it up now. That I used to go longer. Now I'm going a little bit shorter. Some days I'm doing it, some days I'm not. Like, I'm not as, let's say, dogmatic as I used to be, because I used to be like, oh, I'm not eating. It's not before X amount of hours, 16 hours, or I can't touch anything. And now I'm like, I wake up, I'm like, how am I feeling today? And I'm going to base that and when I'm going to eat on that. And I love the term you coined, and you just said it a few seconds ago. I love that, in terms of allowing our digestion to rest. So talk a little bit about that and how you came to that, to coining that term.
As I'm in the midst of writing my second book, the first thing my editor said was, Cynthia, it doesn't sound like you're writing a book about fasting. And I said, absolutely not. When we really are talking about the changes that go on with the gut microbiome, vis-a-vis sex hormone changes, immune system changes, bone health changes, the impacting, ovarian senescence and how that impacts us systemically, but really laser focused on the gut microbiome. I think that because of my podcast, I've been able to interview so many physicians and researchers and other healthcare professionals that it became really apparent to me that no one was speaking directly just to this. And so
Mhm.
understanding what the changes in sex hormones do to diversity, what they do to the
Gut health.
microbiome,
Yeah.
how they impact, immune system signaling. And so when I started thinking about how am I going to approach eating, I was very clear about what we should eat. But then I thought to myself, if most women that have been following me or following my journey that have been intermittent fasting, they may be at a point where maybe they're no longer seeing specific results and we need to change things up. This
Yeah.
is where I think that the role of hormesis can evolve and shift throughout time. And so digestive rest really came to me out of an abundance of desire to speak to the fact that, yes, there will be periods of time in which we don't eat, but it's not going to be as rigid as more of an intermittent fasting schedule. And to be totally transparent, I probably still technically fast probably 1 or 2 days a week, but the rest of the time is really spent around this 12-hour time frame, which still confers benefits, which still is important for digestive functioning, which is still important for hormone balancing, which is still important for the value of pausing. There's the word pause is in perimenopause and menopause. And I always say, like, that word pause is there for a reason. So this is digestive pause. If you want
I
to think
like
of
that.
something that's more consistent with, the pause piece, but giving us an opportunity to think about, do I really need to eat such and such? What am I going to be best served by consuming? What are the things I want to avoid because they don't make me feel good and they don't benefit that my health at this stage of life. And so I think that was just born out of a desire to make sure that I'm addressing things, but also acknowledging, like, here's fasting and here's digestive rest. There are some things that overlap, but they can also be quite different. And the other qualifying thing for me is really speaking about nurturing our bodies, not being as rigid, making sure that we are nourishing and nurturing ourselves at this stage of life.
And to that point, not being as rigid is actually nurturing our body. And it took me a really long time to understand that.
Mhm.
Because before I got here, and I keep saying I really love, like, we might have talked about this when I was on your podcast. Like, I really love being in menopause. And I feel like, and it coincides with being in my 50s. And for me, I feel like I've come to a place in my life that took me a long time to get here, but yet I really understand certain things. What's working for me, what's not? What am I really good at? What am I not? And finding who I am and understanding and accepting it and owning it, right? And I feel like the rigidity, like, I'm very much type AAA personality. It's just who I am. And I accept that as well. And I've also worked on accepting of, like, it's okay not to be as rigid as I was before. So that's why I kind of love this, because it's like that ebb and flow and being more gentle with ourselves as we go into menopause. So I love what you're saying. I just love it because I'm like, yep, yep, yep.
Well, and what's interesting is the more I've brought this concept up, the more people are like, oh yeah, that resonates for me. That makes
Mm,
sense to me. For the
totally.
people who maybe didn't per se feel comfortable, doing long fasts. Like I transparently tell people after a 13-day hospitalization in 2019, long fasts are many years behind me, largely because I think it provides, it's too much of that beneficial stress. Like we talk about hormesis and hormetic stressors. And, for me, just going long periods of time without eating is not necessary. And I think for me personally, and there are other people, like I have plenty of patients that do well having, a 48-hour fast once a month, and that works well for them and they feel good doing it. And I always say, if as long as you've got your stress dialed in and you're sleeping well and you're nourishing your body, then I think that's fine. But do I think that we need to self-flagellate week to week? No.
Mm. Can you explain what hormesis is, just for those who may not understand or know the term?
Yeah, so hormesis is stress. So you can look at it as a dual-edged sword. There's beneficial stress in the right amount at the right time. Like, as an example, we go to the gym and we exercise, and we are purposely choosing to strength train, or we are purposely doing high intensity interval training for a short amount of time. And the thought process is that when we put a little bit of stress on our bodies, and this applies to not just humans, but all organisms, that we are conferring benefits, that we are getting benefits from that. On the other hand, there's another side of that. And I think about at this stage of life, for me personally, if I were doing Orange Theory Fitness 5 days a week or doing CrossFit 5 days a week and
Right.
having no rest days and not nourishing my body, that would be the other side of hormesis. So that would be too much stress, not at the right time, and not in the right amount. And so whether it's exercise, whether it's heat exposure, cold exposure, meal
Mm-hmm.
frequency,
So,
etc. These things have the ability to make us stronger as individuals, mentally, physically, etc., spiritually. Or if it's too much stress, then it can have the opposite effect. It can, blunt our immune response. It can make us more susceptible to disease or infections. It can, we know that if we are dealing with chronic stress on our bodies, it can lead to leaky gut. It can lead to a degree of underlying food sensitivities. It can make us susceptible to opportunistic infections. It can, impact our blood sugar in very negative ways. And so I think that for each person, hormetic stress might look a little different.
mm-hmm.
But we as organisms, in many instances, a traditional westernized culture permits, if not embraces, comfort. And so
Mm.
I would actually argue that we have to get outside of our proverbial comfort zone in order to evolve, shift, and change as individuals. So just like I don't do the same type of exercise I did 5 years ago, I do things differently. I don't have the same fasting regimen that I had 5 years ago. I do things differently. Do I make an effort to get uncomfortable in cold water more frequently? Yes. Do I love it? No. Does that tell me that I need to do more of it? Yes, but it's for a short period of time, whether it's in a cryo chamber or I add 30 minutes, 30 seconds, excuse me, 30 minutes or a minute of cold exposure at the end of my shower. Those are things that can help build resiliency in my body. But if I were dealing with a death of a loved one, I lost my job, I myself was ill, that would not be the time to be looking to find ways to
Right.
add additional stress to my body. And I think women at this stage of life really have to understand that we become a little less stress resilient. I think many women take umbrance at that, but I remind them that that's not a criticism. It's that physiologically things are changing in just such a way that we have to work much more diligently to calm the sympathetic nervous system, to be more conscientious about embracing things that bring us down in terms of like parasympathetic nervous system. So, more meditation, more grounding work, more breath work, gentle yoga, tai chi, those kinds of things, being around people that make us feel good. Darn
Mm.
it, I don't I was telling the other day, how many years did I have friendships with people, thankfully not many, but people that just didn't add
Yeah.
to my mental health or did not add or contribute in a positive way. And so now I'm certainly at a point now, more boundaries. That includes boundaries, for people that, you probably look at either friends from childhood, grad school, post having kids, whatever. You probably have had a lot of shifts and changes in some friendships, and that's okay. Some friendships we outgrow, but having boundaries around things and people that do not serve our best interests.
My mom did a great like a great video on my, and I posted on my TikTok page about a friend that she unfriended because it just wasn't working for her and it wasn't making her feel good. And it did so well because it really resonated with a lot
Mhm.
of people. And it's about making these decisions. And so we have published research. We published one of our surveys that was just published, as I know you know, was on anxiety and stress. And
Mhm.
so 66% of us are more stressed now than we were before and less able to cope with it. So it is a real thing. In my book, I have a whole chapter dedicated to the nervous system because it is such a massive thing for us. So like everything you said, even journaling, just turning off the news. Like there are so many things and I was, my son recently, he went on a trip and I could see like just my levels of anxiety and how quickly I get there have completely changed. Now, I've always been prone to anxiety ever since my teens, but now this is like a different level in terms of like things that make me anxious, right? Or things that I'm like, what are things that I could do that help to like calm my nervous system? What are things that I could do that strategies that I could implement that can help me to mitigate those feelings? So you're right. We have to work diligently at that all the time. And how do we help our nervous system? How do we, stimulate the parasympathetic more often than the sympathetic? Because most of us are in chronic sympathetic mode anyways, right? That's just the way it is. So I completely agree with that. And I think it's an important thing, like you said, to work diligently. I'll repeat myself again because it's a great way to put it.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I'll be totally transparent and say meditation does not come easily to me. It takes a lot for me to quiet my
Same,
mind. In fact,
same.
I think during the pandemic, I bought Muse. I don't have any affiliation with them, but I bought that little headband. And I was so challenged to figure out, okay, how do I quiet my mind? And it would reinforce when your mind was focused on one thing and quieted, so much so that I bought one for my husband and it got my engineer husband meditating. And so I think that for each one of us, there's probably something that comes easy and there's probably something that's more challenging. And I'm the first person to say that when you find something challenging, it's even more reason to do it. Like, I don't like cold. I would much rather be warm. I don't love meditation, but I know I benefit from it. And I can tell you quite honestly, that the last 6 months of 2024 were probably some of the most challenging 6 months of my adult life. And someone was asking me, my brother during all of this got shingles and he shared this, so I'm not
Mm.
disclosing anything, as we were dealing with my dad's death. And I was saying to someone, like, what got me through all this? And I said, I think I finally figured out what I need to do personally to quiet my sympathetic nervous system. And that's what I really was diligent about. Even when it was hard, when I would have preferred staying up to get stuff done, I was like, you need to go to bed. You
Mm.
need to say no. Like, I'll give you another example. I lost my father, my stepmother, my stepfather in 6 months last year.
Sorry.
And my husband had a pneumonia that ended up turning into a big thoracic surgery, otherwise healthy guy. And I recall when someone said, how are you doing? And I just said, you expect to bury your parents. So that we expect, that's the normal exchange. We expect that we will outlive our parents. I said, but it was interesting to me that what happened with my husband, who again was otherwise a very healthy guy, was so stressful. And I was trying to be strong for like my kids. I was like, you don't worry about this. I will worry about this. And trying to be strong for him because my mind went, Mach 1000 because of my background in medicine. And I just kept saying, you need to go back to exactly the things that you teach your patients and your clients about doing when they go through periods of life. Because this is life, right? Life is lifing, as Sean Stevenson says, life is going to go on. How we respond to it is our choice. And so understanding that I was either going to rise to the occasion and just get stuff done, or I was going to crumble in the process. And so I chose, it was very much a decision, but it meant saying no to a lot. It meant being very clear about boundaries. It meant putting myself to bed when I needed to do 500 other things. I was like, you need to go to bed. You need to be making sure you're eating good food. You need to make sure that you're still moving your body. Now, was I doing personal records, like going to hit personal highs on weightlifting? No, that was not what I was doing. But doing things that brought me joy, absolutely. So when people are hearing this conversation and saying, like, they look at both of us and I think, oh, you guys have these, perfect existences. And I remind people all the time, we're still human beings. But how we choose to react when things are not going in a way that you want them to go or are happening on a trajectory that you have no control over, the things and the decisions that you make day to day make all the difference. Like, and I say this from a place of love because I'm someone that likes to be orderly and likes things to be organized, and all of that just had to go out the window, like all of it in the midst of all this, chaos. But having said that, now that I'm kind of on the other side of it, it's like, what made the difference? As a middle-aged menopausal female, were the things that I fell back on that I knew were going to quiet that autonomic nervous system that made the biggest deal. Because we know, even if we look at the research, when you are in the sympathetic dominant state, you can't focus on anything, let alone being able to make good decisions because you're in fight or flight. It's like your body's in survival mode. And so I used to say to my kids, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And I said, that's how I live my life. When things have not been going the way that ideally they should be going. It's like, how do I eat an elephant one bite at a time? And I encourage people, whether you're going through a tough time or you've gone through a tough time, when you reflect back on how you behaved or didn't behave, give yourself grace and understand that the next time you are faced with a challenge, whether it's big or small, you have a choice in how you choose to react. You have a choice in how you choose to move forward and through it. And that is the best way that I can find a reframe when I reflect back on a very, very challenging part of my adult life.
That's so profound. First of all, I'm very sorry for your losses, and I'm sorry to hear about your husband, and I hope is he okay? Like, you able
Yeah,
to
he's
reflect?
6 weeks out of thoracic surgery and doing really, really well.
Okay.
Um, but when you know too much, it's a
Mm,
really like he had two hospitalizations and then had a big surgery. And where we are in our state, we just happen to have like one of the best thoracic surgeons in the country. And I get chills thinking about it. I was like, there are no coincidences. We had a stellar pulmonary team. We had a stellar physician group. Everyone that I dealt with in that hospital was fantastic. I mean, from the nursing team to the people who came in to clean bed, I mean, everyone was
mm.
gracious and kind. And I just said to my husband, we couldn't have asked, I mean, other circumstances, we couldn't have asked for a better way through this. Now, it's funny how when you're in a position where you're trying to be strong for other people, I would cry because my older son was off at college and my younger son, he goes to school in the city close to where my husband was hospitalized. So he would go to see his dad every day after school. So I would be in the car by myself and I would always say, by the time I get to the hospital or by the time I get home, I'm going to be done crying. And that was,
Mhm.
I gave myself, I didn't talk to anyone on the phone. I just needed to get it out. And then I was like, okay, I can be 100% when my car pulls into the driveway for my younger son. When I get to the hospital, I can be 100% there for Todd, being his advocate. And in between, it was like, get it out. If you don't get it out, it just stays kind of trapped in your body. And so for me, like having that release was so important. But how many of us don't find a way to work through our feelings and we hold it in? And as any trauma expert would say, and I'm not the trauma expert, any of the trauma experts would say, if you don't move through it, you will contain it, kind of like a box, and it's going to show up in some way in your health. And I don't want to be one of those people.
And how are you doing now?
Better, better. I mean, I think being 6 weeks out is great. He still has a small, what's called a pneumothorax. So he still has a little bit of his upper left lung that's still kind of, when we see a pneumothorax, it just means it's kind of contracted, but not impacting his oxygen exchange. He's doing really well. The irony is the surgeon said to my husband, I'm not worried if you fly because you
Mm.
had so much scarring in your lung. There's no way it's going to collapse. And so my husband was like, I think that's a good thing. But I think talking about it is so important. I think just normalizing your experience. Like I was trying to explain to someone that, all of us on social media, we choose how much we want to share with our communities. And I was very forthright. I mean, on all my platforms, very forthright, largely because I was struggling to get on any video. But I was like, you know what? I want people to understand what's going on so that maybe they've gone through something like this. Maybe it helps them. And the amount of, kind and encouraging messages, text messages, emails, et cetera, that came, I mean, from people who knew me, people who didn't know me, but just reaching out to say, it's the human experience. We all go through stuff. It's just, how much you choose to share, I think is important because then it validates for people that it's the human process. It's the human condition. Some of us get it more up front. Some of us, it's kind of divided over time, which is where I feel like, that 6 month period of time, it was like every time I came up for air, something else would happen, but it's now behind us. And so I think that you just have to be grateful. I mean, ultimately, you just have to be grateful for the process and the journey and the acknowledgement that we're all human beings.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that and for being so vulnerable. And it's nice to know, like, that's the great thing about social media and your platform and all of our platforms is that we've got this incredible community of women who can reach out to you. So I'm so happy to hear that you have that support. And also, if you don't have social media or social media community, to your friends, to your family, to people that are around you in your area. So, and that just shows the importance of community as well.
Absolutely. And I think that, we decide what we want to share or not share, but I think that if we only share the good, then that's not real. And
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting anyone share highly personal, embarrassing information.
Yeah.
I just think we are part of the sandwich generation. We have teenagers, we have aging parents, everything in between. We're in the sandwich generation. And I think for a lot of people, it's validating to hear others talking about it because I can tell you quite
Totally.
honestly, until May of last year, I knew at some point, our parents would start having health issues, but it was so much in such a short period of time. It was like trying to
Mm,
drink from a fire hydrant. Really.
yeah. That's really tough.
Yeah,
That's really tough. Is it okay if we change the subject? I'd love to.
absolutely.
Okay. So I want to go back to digestive health for a minute. And I literally just finished the digestive chapter 4 in my book. And so I think it would be a great topic to cover and what happens to women with their digestive system as they go into perimenopause and menopause.
Yeah, it's the loss of these sex hormones that drive a lot of symptoms. And I can tell you, much like you've done the research where you've collected information on symptoms that women experience. It could be 100 plus symptoms that women experience. I find in many instances, most women are not reporting symptoms about digestive changes. It's only until we start doing diagnostic testing that all of a sudden they have an opportunistic infection. So let's speak from a high level. We know that estrogen is intricately involved in immune function. Now, we have enterocytes that line the digestive tract that are one cell layer thick. So, why is that important? That's important because it identifies this is a very vulnerable barrier. And if the enterocytes are impacted, we have these channels that can open up and we can develop what many of the lay public know as
Leaky
leaky
gut.
gut. So
Yeah.
it's small intestinal hyperpermeability. But if we have damage to the lining of our enterocytes, number one, this can be from chronic stress. This can be from foods we choose to eat, like the ultra processed foods. This can be from alcohol consumption, smoking. It can be from opportunistic infections. There's a lot that can drive this. The
Yeah.
most common things that I see are chronic stress. Again, we talk about how we become less stress resilient as we're navigating perimenopause and menopause. And cortisol is one of these hormones that gets a bad rap. It's not a bad hormone, but chronic unrelenting stress can damage the gut microbiome, can impact immune function in significant and profound ways. So let's say we develop leaky gut. The insult is we are put on a course of antibiotics. We're dealing with a lot of stress. Maybe we have a family member that gets sick. So we have this compounding things that are ongoing. We develop leaky gut. We start eating healthy foods, let's say, for instance, that start leaking particles into the bloodstream that triggers an inflammatory response. The other thing is, as we're navigating perimenopause and menopause, estrogen signaling is being impacted. Estrogen has a huge protective role on multi systems within not just the gut microbiome, but the digestive system. Understanding that if we are developing immune cell changes, if we are developing a degree of inflammation from otherwise healthy foods, that can show up as hives. We can develop mast cell degranulation. A lot of women will say, but my estrogen's low. But why am I developing these symptoms? And helping them understand that you can still have exposure to estrogen exogenously in the body that can trigger some of these things. So in that setting, sometimes high estrogen can trigger mast cell degranulation, can trigger histamine response, can then trigger hives. I see a lot of digestive issues. Sometimes women have suddenly gone from having normal bowel movements to suddenly they're having diarrhea or they're having chronic constipation, which when people have new onset constipation, if it's not from something more concerning like a tumor or a polyp or some type of colorectal issue, I start thinking about what else is going on farther down in the digestive system. Do you have something in the large intestine? Could you have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth? Could you have SIBO? Could you have SIFO, which is fungal overgrowth? It becomes this domino effect. Are you making enough hydrochloric acid so that you are, when you, for example, you eat a salad at a restaurant and everyone at the table has plenty of hydrochloric acid. So if they ingest a small parasite, not a big deal, but you aren't. And so that parasite then is an opportunistic infection. Or do you not have enough hydrochloric acid? So then you are developing H. pylori, which is another opportunistic infection. And so the opportunistic infection piece is huge. I think when we think about this estrogen signaling that's going on in the gut and how that's impacting susceptibility to infections, I think about digestive transit time. I think about, latent infections. Like if someone has leaky gut and then all of a sudden they start having weird food cravings, is it because the disruption of the microbiome is driving overgrowth of particular bacteria or candida or other types of non-beneficial organisms? When I see leaky gut, I almost always see some degree of dysbiosis, which are an opportunistic infection. I usually will say to patients, it's like you build a beautiful garden and the fruits and vegetables are what you plant, and what grows up in between them are weeds. I would say over tens of thousands of stool samples I've looked at, I have not seen one in a perimenopausal or menopausal female that does not have some degree of dysbiosis.
Oh,
If
yeah.
someone has enough inflammation, they may have disruption of keystone bacteria. They may struggle to digest their fats, be fat malabsorbed. There's a lot that can go on at this stage of life. It's never just one or two things. I find that for a lot of women, gas and bloating tend to be the things that bother them
Huge.
the most.
Yeah.
Women will say, I look like I'm 6 months pregnant, although I'm not. I look like I'm 6 months pregnant by the end of the day. My stomach's flat when I wake up, and then by the end of the day, and that really is suggestive of some type of, I start to think about SIBO in particular, but some degree of methane, which is a gas, which in the digestive system can create a lot of bloating. I mean, those are the kind of higher level things that start to happen, but that loss of sex hormones, we understand a lot about the role of estrogen as it pertains to the gut microbiome. Progesterone, we know it's a balance with estrogen, not as much information there. The other thing that's interesting is there are all these different axes. So there's a gut microbiome bone brain axis, there's a gut microbiome ovarian axis, all these things, this interplay, understanding, like as an example, that ovarian axis, our ovaries are what drive the aging process. I'm sure your listeners know this. Ovarian senescence is what drives the aging process. Now, some of that can be mediated by lifestyle. So if you're a smoker, we know that you're going to age your ovaries faster. If you eat an ultra processed diet, you deal with a lot of chronic stress. There's a lot of research around adverse childhood events and how those women will also go into, if they have high ACE scores, go into menopause earlier because their body has been under chronic sympathetic dominance. I also think about if you have an unhealthy gut, you very likely are going to have unhealthy bones. Now, that's something that tends to be newer. That research is really interesting, but it's all connected to the gut microbiome, immune function, ovarian senescence, bone health. And then, the other piece is a lot of women have a lot of mood changes in perimenopause and menopause. We know the bulk of our neurotransmitters are created in the gut microbiome and the digestive tract. And so if you have opportunistic infections, you have a depletion of keystone bacteria, if you are dealing with an overgrowth of non-beneficial bacteria, that will absolutely impact serotonin, dopamine. We tend to think about it as being a brain issue, but it is really a gut microbiome issue. And so to me, the gut microbiome impacts everything. But when I think about kind of the high level concepts around what's changing in digestion, those are usually some of the more common things that I will see.
It's interesting as you're talking, I'm like, check, 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 check. Yeah, exactly. Like that's what's in my book, because it's so true, right? And I always say, like, there are like two main foundations we need to think about when we go in perimenopause and menopause: our sleep and our digestion, right? And this is more just to simplify things. And the digestive system, as you just explained, is responsible for so many things. So understanding gut health, and it's not an easy topic to understand, because you might hear the word, oh, you got to take care of your gut health, or really pay attention to gut health. But what exactly does that mean, right? And that's everything that you just mentioned, and it's complex and it can be overwhelming, and the average woman might be like, great, where do I start? So I think that's where I'd like to go next, because it does become this overwhelmingly large undertaking to be like, okay, I know I need to focus on it, but does that mean like I need to start by changing what I'm eating? Does it start to, does it change, means I need to go get gut health tests? Like, what does that mean to you, Cynthia?
Yeah, I mean, I think it always goes back to lifestyle first. Like, it's very easy as a clinician to say, oh, we want to do diagnostic testing, we want to do labs. Yes, that's important, but there's a foundational approach, and it's sleep, stress management, nutrition is, those are all very, very important.
Yeah.
And I say that it all starts with food. And my kind of prevailing philosophy about middle-aged women is you got to get your sleep dialed in. Because
Yeah.
if your sleep isn't dialed in, your blood sugar is going to be dysregulated. You're not going to make good food choices, et cetera, et cetera. It's that domino effect. But when we're talking about nutrition in particular for middle-aged women, things that facilitate important components for the gut microbiome and just for overall health in general, number one, you got to eat protein. Like, protein is helpful for satiety. It's helpful for maintaining muscle mass. It's super, super important for repair. And I think that certainly more information is coming out around this now. We want to avoid developing frailty. We want to avoid developing sarcopenia. And if you're not lifting weights and eating enough protein, guess what? You are going to be that little old lady that, trips and falls and breaks her hip. And statistically, we know one hip fracture, kind of is a prognostic indicator for morbidity and mortality. I don't share that to be morbid. I'm not suggesting that every person who falls and breaks a hip is going to end up dying in the near future, but we do know it is a prognostic indicator. The other thing that I think about is how important fiber and phytonutrient density is. So what am I speaking to? I'm not talking about supplements here. I'm really speaking to eating brightly pigmented fruits and vegetables. I think we have convinced women that they need to be fearful of fruit, which I think is a problem. And by that, I usually will say to my patients, 3 vegetables to 1 piece of fruit. So really thinking about it, like, both are important, but, really we want you eating, whether it's brassicas, cruciferous vegetables, putting a salad down and really aiming to get 10 different types of plant materials into your salad. Could be an herb, could be some nuts or seeds. I mean, there's such a wide range.
Spices.
Like, I'm having a
Yeah.
moment with, why am I forgetting the name of it? This occasionally happens to me. I can see the jar of it that's in my refrigerator. Hearts of palm. Right now I'm having a moment with hearts of palm, which are delicious
Yummy.
and they kind of an interesting texture, and I throw them into a salad. But really
Yummy.
thinking
I
about over
like
the
them.
course of a week, having 30 varieties of plant materials. And I know everyone hears that and they're like, but I eat 1 vegetable once a day. I
Yeah.
encourage you to make a couple salads a week. You can get that in fairly easily. And it's important because these phytonutrient dense foods are providing information to the microbiome. Like, there are signaling molecules. Like, I think about pomegranates and urolithin A. I think about facilitation of nitric oxide production. So things like beets are very, very important. And these things get depleted with age. Nitric oxide is intricately involved with estrogen. So as your estrogen is failing or decreasing in your body, you have less nitric oxide production. So I think from my perspective, when I'm looking at all this, it's protein, fiber, phytonutrient density. Most Americans don't eat enough fiber. And I think a lot of people think of fiber like, I'm going to go take my Metamucil. And I'm not to suggest, like, does that have a place? But if you can get it from real food, that's going to be a better option for you. I know that for myself, I mean, there are specific types of supplement products like resistant starches and things like that I will add in as like a fertilizer for the garden. But I always say, like, let's start with food. And then if we need to still add things in, great. Here's a tell. If I start telling my female patient to start including the nutrient density of her food, more fiber, and starts complaining about gas and bloating, the first thing I say is, hey, dial back on portions. A lot of it is portion mediated. So if someone's eating a cup of cruciferous vegetables a day, like Brussels sprouts, which I personally love, I know that if they have not been eating a food like that, they complain of gas and bloating. I'm like, well, let's start with half of that and see how you do. So sometimes it is portion mediated. When I think about the other things that I think are really important, obviously hydration, really being conscientious about avoiding toxins. And by that, I mean avoiding ultra processed foods. I am a realist. I know that, I just got back from a business trip. Was I probably exposed to some things I wouldn't normally eat? Probably, because I ate in restaurants. Having said that, I don't worry about occasional exposure to seed oils. I don't stress about it because most of my diet is so healthy. But I think for a lot of people, if they're eating ultra processed foods all the time, that could be problematic for the gut microbiome. Drinking alcohol excessively, smoking. I mean, to me, those are probably not surprising things that people are doing, but chronic antibiotic use. I think a lot of individuals have just
Yeah.
gotten conditioned to believe that maybe they're that little old lady who's been on chronic UTI prevention protocols, and they just have her on teeny tiny dose of Bactrim or another antibiotic when what they really need, as an example, and you and I both know, is a little bit of vaginal estrogen. Like that would work wonders. And having said that, so that's kind of my approach. I mean, we know that exercise has benefits for blood sugar regulation. The right types of exercise can actually support the microbiome. That means not doing, crazy things like Orange Theory Fitness 6 days a week or CrossFit or high intensity interval training for hours. Like someone said to me the other day, oh yeah, I do HIIT training. I said, okay, well, how long is your HIIT training? Which should be like 10, 12 minutes. Oh, I do 30 minutes of it. I was like,
Mm,
that's not what we're talking about. So
yeah.
understanding balancing cortisol has to be about right type of hormetic stressor, right time. If you have a stressful thing going on in your personal life, that's not the time to like reel back. The other thing about nutrition that I think is important is meal frequency. So I will always be a fan of, 2 to 3 meals a day as opposed to snacks and mini meals. I know that you and I both trained during a time when, we were telling our patients, eat to stoke your metabolism. We know that's actually
Yeah.
not right information to be conveying, but I think all of those can be hugely impactful.
Mm. And it's what's interesting. So just to go back on a couple of things, when you were talking about fiber, I think, you know, just to give all of you some idea of the amounts, like you really want to get 25 to 35 grams of fiber a day. And I know it's a number that we kind of pulled from, but it's an important number to try to get to because what research shows is that we're only getting maybe 50% of that, maybe. Like, so fiber is important for so many things, and including making sure you're going to the bathroom because you want to make sure you're going to the bathroom at least once a day because of like things that you're exposed to during the day and your estrogen and your hormone metabolites and just things that shouldn't be in your body, waste, undigested food, all of that. So you want to make sure you are getting fiber. And Cynthia, I 1000% agree with you. Always lifestyle and nutrition first, always. Like it has to be the foundation for anything that you do and anything, any way that you live. And then if you need it, take the extras, take the supplements. I'm a big fan of taking supplements. Like, for example, we have Fiber S, which is a fiber supplement, but it shouldn't be the only fiber you get in your day. It should be one of those supplements to what
Mm,
you're already eating. And I know it's hard, and here's the interesting thing too. It's hard because the older we get, a lot of us tend to eat less. We're not as hungry, or or we get full a little bit faster. Our digestive system's not working the same way. So I get it, but really being mindful of how much you're getting, especially of the fiber and the protein, is important. The other thing I want to add to what you said as well when it comes to protein is it's so crucial, protein, for everything that you talked about, including blood sugar regulation, brain health, all of that, right? Cravings throughout the day. However, because a lot of it, and I'm sure you talk about this all the time with your patients or your clients, is that because our digestive system is changing, we may not absorb it. We may not break down our foods, especially protein, the way that we did before. So being mindful of really taking the time to chew your food properly, making sure that you're not eating when you're stressed because cortisol can disrupt just
mhm.
digestion, right? If eating and drinking, although there's not a ton of science on this, but for some people, eating and drinking at the same time, maybe that will disrupt their digestion. So being mindful of digesting your food because we're only, what we eat and digest and absorb is really what's critical. So we want to make sure that we're absorbing, excuse me, we want to make sure that we're absorbing the protein that we're eating and all the other good foods that you mentioned that we're eating. So just being mindful of that as well. So if you are getting the gas and the loose and the constipation, the loose stools, all of that, indigestion, working with a practitioner that can maybe help you decipher what is going on, that could provide tips and help you, could be very helpful as well. And the last thing I want to mention to what you said is also looking for diversity of the food that we're eating. So like I love that you said, eating 30 different plant foods. And I know that's a goal that we want to try to reach. But even like in a day, like 4 to 5 different colors, eating the rainbow. And a lot of you have probably heard this term is eating the rainbow. And there's a reason why we want to eat the rainbow is because they all have different phytonutrients, which are all these amazing plant chemicals that we're eating. So I recently had, and you said, Cynthia, which I love what you said, you're like, I've looked at so many different gut health tests. I recently had a gut health test too. And I'm like, okay, I got to get my diversity up because most of us tend to eat the same things over and over. So I've been so diligent about trying to increase and try to make sure that I'm getting different types of food. So you're like having a moment with hearts of palm. I'm having a moment with artichoke. I'm having a moment with Jerusalem artichoke. I'm having a moment with watermelon radish. I'm like
Oh,
loving
I
these,
love
right?
watermelon radish.
Oh, it is so good. And it's got those anthocyanins in it. So, like, I'm trying to be very mindful when I'm shopping to buy things that are out of my comfort zone of like, oh, okay, I'll just make my salad with my lettuce and my carrots and my purple cabbage. And like, I'll get my 5 different colors, but they're all, a lot of the time, it's the same thing over and over again. So just trying to eat different things. One of the things I tried recently, which I've tried it before, but I love is persimmons because it was very much in season. So just trying to get those different colors for me are just, it's just been something that I've been trying to get more of. So thank you for sharing that because all of what you said is so critical. And it's, especially for us that are having a lot of these issues, especially that women are like, oh, I never had so much gas and bloating in my life, right? Or I've never like, why is it like, why do I have loose stools, or why am I only going to the bathroom once a week? Right. So all of this is huge for us.
I can't fathom. I mean, I think when patients tell me they go to the bathroom once or twice a week, I'm like, I can't even fathom. Like that's so different than like my own personal experience. And I think that whatever is our norm is what we consider to be normal. And so
Mm,
having those
mm.
conversations about elimination and why it's so important to not be recirculating your estrogen and why it's so important to make sure that, your hormone levels are optimized, your beta glucuronidase, which is an enzyme that helps break down
Oh, can you
estrogen
explain that?
metabolites.
Yeah.
Yep, is helping people understand why that's so important.
Yeah, no, everything that you said is bingo, spot on. And I totally agree. Is there anything else around digestive health that you didn't touch on that you think that would be really valuable for our listeners?
Well, I mean, I think whomever you're working with, this obviously a licensed provider would be the person that would be talking about medical therapy, but I start thinking about not just hormone replacement therapy and the value for supporting the gut microbiome, but I also think about targeted supplementation just based on symptoms, whether it's a probiotic, whether it is a beneficial yeast like Sac boulardii, whether it is
I like that.
something like a signaling molecule like urolithin A, Mitopure is one of my favorites. I think specifically about, when I'm looking at someone's stool study and their symptoms, what are the other things that they're not going to be able to get sufficiently from food, but would be of benefit? What are the things that are going to help with energy production? What are the things that are going to help with energy overall? And those are things like even creatine monohydrate helps with ATP production. So, from my perspective, I start to think broadly about what would be of greatest benefit, whether it's sleep support, stress management support, nutritional support, signaling molecules, in addition to hormone replacement therapy. And if your provider's not talking to you about your options with hormone replacement therapy, understanding that it is your right to be properly counseled on your unique circumstances and what would be of greatest benefit. Many women do really well on just oral progesterone for a long period of time.
I was on it for many,
Oh,
many years.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't take any, I don't say this lightly. I went far too long without taking oral progesterone. And so by the time I was taking it regularly, I had suffered with inconsistent sleep for a long time. And, plus or minus estrogen, plus or minus testosterone, plus or minus DHEA, plus or minus other things that can be a benefit. If you're someone that's really struggling with metabolic health, talking to your providers about the potentiality of things like GLP-1s, especially the second generation, like tirzepatide, can be very, very helpful. I have someone, we have literally done every single foundational lever possible,
Yeah.
including even like glucophage or metformin, that has not been effective about turning around their insulin and glucose levels. And I've seen incredible improvements with tirzepatide. So I always say, like, there's nothing wrong with taking pharmaceuticals, but the lifestyle stuff has to really be dialed in first before we start looping in pharma. It's not that I'm anti-medication. I just think that we need to be conscientious. And the other thing is really doing a thorough evaluation of not just gut health, underlying food sensitivities, looking at how you metabolize your estrogen. This is where I think the Dutch hormone test, I like to look at estrogen metabolites.
I agree with you.
And I like to really be conscientious, what are their iron levels looking like? What are their thyroid labs looking like? Let's look, let's be conscientious and systemic, looking at what else could be contributing to what's going on.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And why do you think it is? So for those patients that you're working with or clients that you're working with, why do you think it is when they've done everything under the sun, but they still can't get their insulin, their blood glucose under control?
Oh, I mean, it could be so many different things. I think a lot of people, they have too much stored energy. So they're not able to access the fat stores. They're not able to break down the fats, whether it's they need to do a little bit of fasting, whether it's there's chronic stress. I mean, I have some very, very successful C-level patients that their jobs are too damn stressful. And
Mhm.
until they eliminate some of the stress, that chronic cortisol activation is going to lead to glucose going up, insulin going up, staying up, and contributing to, persistent weight loss resistance. And so whether it's a stressful marriage, whether it's a stressful job, whether it's just, people are dealing with, a finite amount of, financial challenges. I mean, there's a lot of things that can contribute, but that is certainly one of the most common things that I see. And that's why we have those frank conversations once we've dialed in on everything else. I mean, I think latent infections, looking at, do they have reactivation of autoimmune conditions? Do they have reactivation of viruses? But almost always when they're dealing with chronic weight loss resistance, poor metabolic health, we really have to look very diligently at the gut. And there's good tests, and then there are tests that I don't think per se are as valuable. And I think it's also the other piece of it is working with someone that's looked at hundreds and hundreds of that test. Like the Dutch
I
is a
agree.
great example of a very complicated test to learn how to interpret properly. And I've had women come to me whose physician has ordered the test and the physician doesn't know how to interpret it. And they've just spent $400 to $600 on a test, and the test, they have to come to me, and then we're looking at it together, and then I'm interpreting it for the person they're working with. But you know making sure the person you're working with actually knows how to interpret the test. Like I think that there are a lot of very well-meaning people that order tests that they don't know what to do with the results, and that to me is another problem. Sometimes that can
Mhm.
delay getting people the results that they're looking for.
Yeah, especially because they could be, even if they're in very much layman's term, it could be complicated if that's not your area of expertise. So working with a qualified practitioner who understands it, like I always go back to, there's so much we can learn on our own,
Mm-hmm.
and with the internet and with following influencers online, if you may. And I always say, be careful who you get your information from, because it's gonna depending on who it's from, like, don't only take one person's opinion. I would say get, several people's opinion, and then do what works for you, right? We just have to be mindful of where you're gathering your information. So I feel like, some of these tests, like, they could be, easy to understand, but it's hard to interpret on our own when we look through it. So, finding the right person who can help you, that jives with you, that is on the same page as you, is really important. Now, which leads me, Cynthia. So, like, do you practice? Like, can you talk a little bit about if someone wants to work with you? Do you work one on one with clients? Like, talk a little bit about how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm really working predominantly with people in group programs. I have really curtailed my one-on-one work largely because if I'm focused on that, then I can't do the podcast and do the public speaking. And so I have a wonderful team. I do have some advanced practice nurses on my team that are able to pick up patients, as well as an amazing group of health coaches. We run programs throughout the year. And, one of the best ways is just to go to my website and check it out there, which is www.cynthiathurlow.com. You can also check out my podcast, Everyday Wellness, that Andrea has been a guest on and got really great feedback on our podcast together. My
Oh,
first book is on intermittent fasting in women. And then lastly, I would say I have a supplement line called the Midlife Pause, which is the working title of my next book that is solely focused on women, but kind of the flagship product is this new creatine monohydrate that we've pulled together, which is exciting because it blends like nootropic agents and some taurine and B vitamins all in a way that is individualized. We got a lot of feedback. People didn't like sticking their hands in pouches of bags to pull product out. So now we made it easy. It's all individualized and packaged.
That's awesome. And I would love to continue the conversation another time about creatine, because I know that people are talking about it, that it's great for perimenopause and menopause. And because now you launched your own supplement line that has creatine in it, I think it would be awesome to have a conversation around it about why we should be taking it, how does it help us, and all of that.
No, I'd love to.
Amazing. Well, thank you for doing this today. I'm so happy that we made this happen, and I look forward to you coming back on in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Cynthia as much as I did. I love how her and I are on the same page about pretty much everything when it comes to nutrition, lifestyle, and supplements. If you did enjoy it, please share it, because the more you share shows you care. And please take a moment to rate and review our podcast, because when you do that, it tells the algorithm that you're enjoying the information that you're hearing, and then it sends it out to more women in perimenopause and menopause. Thank you for spending the last little bit with me. I know there's a lot you could be doing, but instead you chose to spend your time with me. And for that, I am grateful. I'll see you at the next interview.